never thought the corrupted would rise. The first sign that something was wrong came from a video my real estate agent posted online. Changxing Hospital, right next to the Tongtian Gardens subway station, had been cordoned off behind a long line of police tape. Well, damn, something had gone seriously wrong at Changxing Hospital. Cops everywhere, doctors swarming the place. I just typed confirmed case in the comments from the subway, and by the time I refreshed the page, it was gone. A message from my agent came through right after a voice note. I'd barely put my earphones in when the second message arrived. Hey man, I was just about to reply, how'd my post just vanish? I didn't delete it. Not sure if it's a confirmed case, but those SWAT guys look intimidating as hell. Your lease is coming up soon, right? You renewing? I frowned. I hadn't made up my mind about renewing. The place in Tongtian Gardens had a great layout, convenient amenities, and reasonable rent, but the area was so densely packed that the 8 a.m. subway crush drained me, body and soul, every single day. But actually moving meant hunting for a new place, hauling everything out, and then handing over a deposit plus 3 months rent up front, a whole ordeal. While I was still turning it over in my head, his third voice note came through, 59 seconds long. My head started to ache just looking at it. The first half was the usual pitch. It's July, graduates are flooding the market, units are going fast, renew now and get a discount. Then the second half took a turn. Without any warning, a muffled scream bled into the recording, then a sharp "what the hell," followed by a wall of chaotic noise, crackling and indistinct, until one final explosive crash. I hadn't even turned my volume up that high, but that last crash still sent a jolt of pain straight through my ears. I pulled out my earphones, shouldered through the crowd to the subway window, and strained to look in the direction of the hospital. But the train was nearly at the next stop, and there was nothing to see. I sent back a quick "still thinking about it," and never heard from him again. A quiet unease settled over me. When I got to the office, barely half the staff had shown up. Everyone was talking about the 4 official statements released the day before, yet somehow, no one seemed to know about the suspected case near Tongtian Gardens. The scream and that crash I'd heard that morning still hadn't left me. I couldn't help myself. I messaged a colleague who also lived in Tongtian Gardens. He pinged back almost instantly. "Get out of Baicheng, now." My chest tightened. The unease inside me sharpened into something closer to fear. Typing felt too slow. I called him. He picked up after one ring. In the background, a boarding announcement echoed through an airport terminal. Before I could say a word, he dropped his voice and spoke fast. "City lockdown at 8 tomorrow morning. If you can leave, leave. Stock up like your life depends on it." Then the line went dead. A video came through right after. It was footage of Changxing Hospital. The camera swept past the emergency entrance and zoomed in on the interior of the ER. A man in a hospital gown, breaking free from 4 people trying to hold him down. Subdued for just a moment, and in that moment, he tore a chunk of flesh from one of their arms. Blood poured freely. 30 seconds later, the man in the gown convulsed and collapsed. The video cut out. A panic I couldn't name slammed into my chest like iron fists. I'd never been the type to believe everything I saw online, but in that moment, one word forced its way into my mind, and I was on my feet before I even knew it. With my colleagues staring in confusion, I kept my eyes down and said there was an emergency at home. I needed to leave. My boss startled, then something seemed to click for him. He said quickly, "Go home, take the week, get out of here." Pushing that word out of my mind, I hailed a ride. And while I waited, I called my mother. "Mom, pack your things and head back to Qingyuan right now. I'm coming home today." She was working in Hangzhou, 400 kilometers from Qingyuan. It was only Monday, but she'd drop everything for her son. She was already the type to head straight for the airport without a second thought. Still, she sounded a little thrown by the suddenness of it all. My ride was almost there, and I didn't have time to explain. I promised I'd call her back the moment I got out of the car. The second ring road was worse than usual. Even the driver muttered about it more than once. I kept glancing back out the rear window, the video still playing in my head, anxiety gnawing at me. But I knew panic wouldn't get me anywhere. I took a few deep breaths, hands trembling, opened a travel app, and searched for direct flights to Qingyuan. The earliest available flight departed at 2:40 p.m. from the capital airport. 1 seat left, priced at just over 2,000 yuan. I didn't even blink. I booked it and paid in one go. Then I called my father. Last October, our family had bought a new apartment in Qingyuan, 3 bedrooms, 1 living room, 2 bathrooms. It was a new development, and construction ran slow. The renovations weren't finished until April. Since April, there'd been ongoing outbreaks on my end. Going back meant 14 days in quarantine, so seeing the new place had kept getting pushed back. He picked up, and before he could say anything, I asked for the new apartment's address and told him to leave work immediately. "I'm arriving this afternoon." He refused outright. He was a methodical man, a chemist by profession, and if I was going to drag him away from work without giving him a solid reason, he wasn't going to budge. But I was his son, and I knew how to work with that. I told him I'd bought a ton of groceries, ribs that would spoil if he didn't get home, other things that might go missing. And without missing a beat, he was scolding me for wasting money while already filing for leave. I hung up. The car finally cleared the worst of the gridlock and merged onto the expressway heading north. Even the expressway was packed nearly as bad as evening rush hour. I wondered if these people had heard something too, if they were all running, just like me. There was no time to waste. I opened a delivery app, entered the new apartment's address, and started looking for the nearest supermarket to place an order. Qingyuan was a small city, the only major supermarkets were big chain stores, and the whole city usually had just two of them, scattered across different districts. I went to place an order and found there wasn't a single large supermarket near the new apartment. My heart sank. I switched apps and searched again and finally found one decent-looking convenience store. I'd been living on takeout for years and rarely cooked, so I genuinely had no idea which cooking oil we even used at home. Filling the cart that day gave me a whole new appreciation for just how much it cost to run a household. As for meat, I skipped it. Convenience store prices were brutal, and the quality was questionable. Better to go to the wholesale market with my parents once I got home. I hit confirm. Just like that, over 20,000 yuan was gone. The car had pulled up to the complex while I was still shopping, and I rushed to check out just to lock in that first round of supplies. I'd barely stepped out of the car when the store owner called. He confirmed my order 3 times, clearly suspicious, then hung up. I looked at the delivery address, Jinyu Yuan Residential Complex, Building 12, Unit 1, Basement Level 1, and couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of pride at my own foresight. I knew an order this size would raise eyebrows, so I deliberately left out my actual Unit 3, Floor 16, and chosen to haul everything up myself rather than risk anyone knowing exactly where we were. Looking at the full order confirmed on my screen, I finally felt something loosen in my chest. I still didn't know exactly what was coming, but escaping Baicheng this afternoon hadn't made me relax. If anything, it sharpened me. What was wrong with the man in that video? A megacity of tens of millions, a critical transportation hub, locked down just like that. Why was I running from the most important city in the country? Had it already slipped out of control? What was happening to this world? Back at my rental, in the privacy of my own room, I started a video call with the family group, all 3 of us. My mother answered instantly. Her laptop was already packed. She was just waiting for this call before heading out. My father took a few more rings. He was in the kitchen washing vegetables. His hands were still wet when he picked up. The moment I saw their faces, something in me gave way. My voice shook before I could even get a word out. I'd never been particularly tough, but the weight of what I knew nearly crushed me. I was afraid to say it, afraid they'd laugh it off. My mother's brow furrowed immediately. What's wrong? What happened? My father turned off the tap without a word. 2 or 3 seconds of silence. Then, son, does this have something to do with you coming home all of a sudden? I nodded. There was no time to waste. I forced my voice out through the trembling. I don't know exactly what's happening, but I know it's serious. The city's going into lockdown at 8 tomorrow morning. Someone warned me to run, and to stock up on as much as I can. I'm really scared. Please trust me. We need enough supplies to last at least a year. My mother spoke first. Don't be scared. Your father and I have your back, always. My father tried to look calm, but his furrowed brow gave him away. Who else would we believe if not you? He took a deep breath and untied his apron. Stocking up, got it. Forget dinner tonight. I'm heading to the wholesale market. Send me your order list, son. I'll check what you've missed and fill in the gaps. My mother stood up too. I'll pick up some supplies on my way back from Hangzhou. Don't worry, our family is going to be fine. Don't be afraid. Go pack and get to that airport. Don't miss your flight. Their trust washed over me like warmth. I rushed to add, I've already placed a big order. To avoid drawing attention, I had it delivered to the basement on the ground level. It should arrive around 8 tonight. When you bring it up, make sure no one sees you. My father grabbed his car keys and headed for the door. Got it. Relax. You remember how every year before winter we'd stock up hundreds of pounds of cabbage? I've done this before, and I'm not about to let anything happen to you. I nodded, hung up, and spent a moment willing my arms and legs to stop shaking before I started packing up the rental. There wasn't much to take. The new place already had cookware and bedding. In the end, I packed 2 large suitcases of clothes, my laptop, and the stash of medicine I'd kept on hand. Food, I left behind. The flight was at 2:40, but I was out the door by 11. Normally it was a half-hour drive from Tongtian Gardens to the airport, but not today. I'd already checked the navigation app. The airport expressway was solid dark red. I grabbed my suitcases and made for the subway. The subway was more packed than any morning rush I could remember. I shoved myself and my 2 suitcases through the crowd and barely squeezed on board, only to be hit by a wall of sweat so thick it nearly made me gag. Something told me that more people knew about the lockdown than I'd assumed, and I was right. By the 3rd stop, Bishui Bridge South, not a single person more could board. Bodies pressed against bodies, heel to heel, no room left to breathe. I craned my neck to see through the window. The road below the bridge was gridlocked as far as I could see in either direction. We were fish on a cutting board, unable to move forward or back. Some people had already given up and were cycling back the way they came. My anxiety quietly climbed. With every station the train passed, my heart lurched, terrified it would stall somewhere in the dark between stops and never move again. When we finally reached Beiqinqiao Station, I grabbed my suitcases and ran. A flood of people poured out of the train. I planted myself across 3 steps of the escalator, while others surged toward the elevator at the far end, fighting for position. The elevator filled in seconds and shot upward, leaving those who hadn't made it to hesitate briefly before rushing toward the escalator instead. I gritted my teeth, tightened my grip, and hauled both suitcases up the escalator 1 step at a time. By the time I reached the airport express platform, the doors were already beeping their closing warning. I hurled one suitcase through the doors, abandoned the second on the platform, sprinted with everything I had, and threw myself through the gap just as the doors closed. A scrap of clothing caught between them. The airport express was blasting cold air far harder than the last train. The chill hit me like ice water the moment I stepped on. The suitcase I'd thrown had cracked against a handrail, leaving a dent in the shell. A kind stranger passed it back to me. I thanked him. The pain in my palms finally caught up with me. I looked down. Both hands were swollen and raw, a deep red that spread from the center of each palm all the way to my fingertips. I wrapped my hands around the cold metal handrail and held on, letting the chill work against the swelling. No one spoke on the airport express, but it wasn't quiet. The frantic tapping of screens filled the carriage from end to end. Everyone was sending messages. I sent a quick update to our family group, then opened a social media app. After a 3-second AD, I was about to search some keywords when the official subway account I followed refreshed at the top of my feed. Posted 1 minute ago. Notice, in coordination with expressway traffic controls, the Capital Airport line will suspend operations from 11:40 a.m. on July 18, 2022, through the last service of the day. The train screamed through the tunnel, the compressed air shrieking around it. My scalp prickled. Goosebumps broke across my skin. Every nerve in my body fired at once. The realization hit me with perfect clarity. This was the last train to the airport, and worse news was still coming. I steadied myself and searched Changxing Hospital, Tongtian Gardens. Every result had been scrubbed. That particular brand of obvious censorship, the kind that proves exactly what it's trying to hide, was playing out right on my screen. Then, after just a second's hesitation, I typed the word I'd been holding back: corrupted. The arrival chime rang out. My mind exploded. I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead with my sleeve, grabbed my suitcase, and ran with the crowd. My hands burned with every step. I had no time to care. The shock inside me dwarfed the pain. Adrenaline surged through me so hard my eardrums throbbed. The truth was too horrifying to sit with. Inside the terminal, security had tightened sharply. Beyond the standard health clearance pass and a negative test within 48 hours, airport staff were now escorting passengers aside to write down everywhere they'd been. Sweat dripped into my eyes, and they started to burn. The staff member overseeing me handed me a form. While I wiped my face, I caught a glimpse of the papers tucked under his arm, the words, Changxing Hospital, faintly visible. My heart stopped. I filled in everything honestly: my workplace, my home address, the public places I'd been recently, and then my pen hovered back over the line that read current address. A moment later, I handed the form in. He read through it carefully, glanced at the single suitcase in my hand, asked me a few brief questions, and waved me through. Others behind me weren't so lucky. Several passengers were turned away for reasons I couldn't make out, and at one point, armed officers and medical staff came running to physically restrain and remove someone. The rest of security went smoothly. The lines were surprisingly short. At gate 43, something in me finally began to ease. I'd arrived 2 full hours early, and the waiting area was nearly empty. I found a quiet corner and called my father. It rang for a while before he picked up. The background was pure noise. He was talking rapidly to someone else, and through the chaos I could just make out fragments: hind leg, hens, frozen cuts. When he finally turned to me, he said, "Busy over here. Just locked in 200 pounds of pork, 100 pounds of beef, 100 pounds of lamb, 4 whole chickens. Still need wings and drumsticks. Anything else you want?" His speed stunned me. I'd only meant to suggest he pick up some extra meat, and now I was just trying to keep up. I told him to add a solar generator, batteries, and a few extra refrigerators to the list. I'd search for anything else we needed. Between the rush and the relentless tension, my brain just crashed. After I hung up, I scraped together a supply list from every search engine and platform I could find. Once I had 2 lists ready, I let out a long breath and dropped them into our family group. My father's reply came almost immediately. I rolled my stiff neck and looked up through the window. The sky was a deep, clear blue, one of those rare, beautiful days in this city. I hoped it was a good sign. Attention passengers on Huaitian Airlines Flight HT1111 to Qingyuan. Your flight will begin boarding in 15 minutes. Please have your belongings ready and proceed to gate 43. The handful of passengers nearby started drifting toward the gate. There were far fewer on this flight than I'd expected. As the plane lifted off, I caught a glimpse in a blind corner of the tarmac, a figure, on its knees, tearing at something on the ground. Just before the angle cut away entirely, it raised its head. For one brief moment, our eyes met, and I was looking into 2 rotting eyes. The plane flew on, smooth and steady. My stomach was anything but. The image of that corrupted's decayed face kept replaying behind my eyes. I folded down the tray table and pressed my forehead against it, fighting down the urge to be sick. Hold it together. Throwing up now will draw attention. The next 2 hours were agony, a loop of willing myself to stay calm and warning myself not to break. The moment I stepped off the plane and breathed the clean air of Qingyuan, the cramping in my stomach began to ease. I wasn't the only one. An older man ahead of me stepped off the plane and immediately began vomiting violently right there on the tarmac. I saw it happen and moved away fast. Because beyond the corrupted and the other things we weren't allowed to name, chaos itself was a crisis we'd have to navigate. Before entering the terminal, I glanced back one last time. A few staff members and concerned passengers had gathered around him. He wasn't done yet. Hunched over in the shape of a capital N, his throat making a hollow, rattling wheeze with every heave. He didn't look good at all. Outside the terminal, I spotted my mother right away. She came forward in a few quick steps and took the suitcase from my hands. In a world that had every reason to make us afraid, we both smiled and meant it. The collapse had begun, and I was grateful beyond words to face it with my family. In the car, I immediately noticed the back seat was packed to the ceiling with hardware store goods I didn't even recognize. And just like that, I felt safer. There really is no place like home. My mother tossed my suitcase into the trunk and got in. "We can't go home yet. Let's finish the shopping today. Starting tomorrow, we stay inside." I nodded immediately. It was exactly the right call. Push through today, stock enough for the three of us to live comfortably for a full year, and tomorrow our chances of survival would be dramatically better. In that time, we could train, build our strength, and wait for rescue to come. On my own I could manage, but the thought of my parents, at their age, having to scavenge through the collapse, made me wish I had 6 arms and twice the strength, just to keep them both safe under my protection. And so my mother and I went into full sweep mode. Her purchasing power stunned me all over again. Steel wire, iron chains, combination locks, acoustic insulation foam, things I never would have thought to buy. We cleared off the shelves until even I thought we'd gone too far. Just before a building supplies store closed for the day, my mother ordered the highest grade reinforced blast-proof glass and blast-proof doors they had. The owner said they were out of stock. Installation would take 3 days. My mother waved her hand and doubled the offer on the spot. The owner's face broke into a grin. Turns out they could come, right now. I barely got a word in the whole time. I just followed behind her, pushing the cart, watching the pile grow higher and higher. When she was finally satisfied, she led the owner and his crew to our apartment in her SUV. Jinyu Yuan was a new development. Handover had been slow, occupancy was still extremely low. No more than a dozen families had moved in. The complex had 4 gates: north, south, east, west, but with so few residents, only the north gate was open. The north road was wide, and Building 12, our building, sat right beside it. Easy access for the workers. It took us half an hour to get everything upstairs. The crew worked fast. The door was replaced in no time. I stepped aside to call my father and find out when he'd be back. He was in the middle of haggling over clothes at a department store right at the critical moment. My call snapped him out of it. "Fine, I'll head home. Can't get the price down anyway. I'll try the underground market tomorrow." The seller immediately caved. "You win, just take it." My father's mood lifted instantly. While the seller was bagging the item, I quickly asked, "The meat and the solar generator, when are they being delivered?" His voice dropped. "The wholesale place said they'll pack the meat straight into the fridges and deliver it all together, same supplier. The solar generator's already there. I had them leave it outside unit 1502. That place hasn't been renovated yet. No one will see it. Everything else I had them put in the stairwell on the 20th floor. Nobody goes that high." I hung up and went up to the 15th floor to check on the solar generator. Then I quietly climbed the rest of the way to the 20th floor, list in hand, and checked the delivery against what I'd ordered. Bottled water, toilet paper, self-heating meal packs, quicklime, water storage tanks, rainwater collectors, rubbing alcohol, all there. There was so much of it that the supplies stretched from the 20th floor all the way up to the 24th. With outsiders in the building, I wasn't comfortable leaving everything exposed in the stairwell. Since I wasn't needed for the glass installation, I planted myself in the stairwell and stayed there until every last worker had packed up and left, then went downstairs and got my mother to help me move everything. Stockpiling felt great. Hauling it all was a different story. My mother and I had moved about a quarter of it when my father finally got back, arriving with 3 bags in each hand himself, 2 loaded down to help us. By 9 o'clock, we'd moved just over half. That's when the delivery from the convenience store arrived. The courier dumped everything in one pile outside the basement entrance of Unit 1. We agreed. The upstairs supplies could wait. The stuff downstairs was blocking the way and drawing attention. We each grabbed a cart, rode the elevator down to the basement, and started sorting through the pile by the Unit 1 entrance. I got dizzy more than once during that stretch, but every load we carried through the door brought a deep, solid sense of satisfaction. When we finally hit the wall, we each wolfed down a chocolate bar and got back to it. Just after 11 that night, my father's meat order arrived, fridges and all. Our elevator served 1 unit per floor, with 2 units per level separated by a solid fire door. We'd considered having it delivered to the neighboring unit to save hassle, but my father pointed out that a late-night meat delivery would look strange. And our own doorway and apartment were buried in supplies. The last thing we needed was anyone seeing inside. So my father gave them a different address. The entrance of Building 10, Unit 2, across the way. The delivery guy didn't bat an eye. He agreed without a second thought. My parents slipped through the basement of Building 11 and came out at Building 10, Unit 2, and made trip after trip with the large cart moving the fridges back to our place. While they did that, I kept moving. I knew this run would cost them both days of rest afterward, so I hauled the remaining supplies from the basement up by myself. In the end, it took us until 2 in the morning to get every last item inside. By our count, Beijing had less than 6 hours before lockdown. The complex was eerily quiet. None of us felt like sleeping. The apartment was a chaos of boxes and bags, nowhere to step, everything still waiting to be sorted. While my parents worked on the solar generator, I slipped into the kitchen and cooked 3 bowls of noodles. I hadn't cooked much during the 2 years I'd been away, but I'd picked up a fair amount from watching videos online. There's an old saying, dumplings for the road, noodles for the return. I pulled out enough dried noodles for 3, waited for the water to roll into a full boil, and dropped them in. I set out 3 large bowls, added a spoonful of lard to each, a scatter of chopped scallions, a spoonful of soy sauce, a drizzle of sesame oil, a pinch of chicken bouillon, and salt. When the noodles were tumbling in the boil, I ladled a generous scoop of the cooking broth over the seasoning in each bowl. Steam and fragrance rolled up together and hit my senses all at once. My stomach growled. Once the seasoning had dissolved into the broth, I turned off the heat, lifted out the noodles, and finished each bowl in one smooth motion. 3 bowls of plain broth noodles, done. I carried them to the coffee table in the living room. My parents were hungry by then too. They set down the nearly assembled solar generator, and the 3 of us sat on the floor and finished our bowls of hot noodles in a matter of minutes. My mother drained every last drop of broth and broke into a satisfied sweat. That kind of warmth works its way through you, clears the cold from your bones, and brings your energy back. We rested for a short while, then went back to work. The 5-kilowatt solar generator was mostly figured out. The remaining large items, the rainwater collector and the rainwater filter, weren't needed yet. Even though it was July, the forecast for Qingyuan showed a cold snap coming, with little rain. We decided to leave them on the balcony for now and set them up when the time came. My father laid out the plan. He and I would sort the food supplies, my mother would handle the tools, and anything that wasn't urgent could wait until morning. The new apartment worked in our favor. The study had nothing in it but a large bookcase, not even a desk yet, which freed up a lot of room. The smaller bedroom was equally bare, just a double bed. The custom furniture for the other rooms wasn't due until next month, originally timed so I could use the space during the National Day holiday. That plan no longer mattered. With so little furniture in the way, we had everything sorted and stored by just after 5 in the morning, ahead of what any of us had hoped for. The apartment was 180 square meters, but with this much stocked inside, the only open space left was the rest area I'd kept clear in the living room. Everywhere else, the place looked like a warehouse. Baicheng had just over 2 hours before lockdown. None of us could sleep. My mother mopped the floors. My father started germinating seeds. I fed the 4 hens my father had brought back from the market the night before. The 4 hens lived on the enclosed balcony off the kitchen, nothing in there but the chickens, acoustic insulation foam lining every surface, and an air purifier set up with almost comical seriousness. Close the door after feeding them, and you couldn't hear so much as a crow. By the time daylight came through fully, I had a moment to start filling the water storage tanks, then scrolled through my social feed. I'd expected some whisper of what was happening. Instead, yesterday's posts were blissfully unaware. Except for a handful of people posting from overseas, their captions carrying a weight that only those who knew would understand. While the world scrolled on quiet as ever, we sat eating the sandwiches my father had made. Tomato, fried egg, bacon. One bite and the juices burst across my tongue, the warmth and richness pulling my eyelids heavy. Boom! The crash jolted my eyes wide open. Before my sluggish mind could process what had happened, a piercing scream tore through the complex, and then more screaming, voices impossible to distinguish, clawing their way into my ears all at once. One by one, the few lit windows in the complex slid open. Some people leaned out to look, others yanked their curtains shut and went back to sleep. Then came the sound of retching, raw and involuntary, and the last of the sleeping complex came awake. The sound of something chewing through bone echoed through the empty courtyard like a curse. Someone was shouting to call emergency services, others were throwing things off their balconies at the creature below. I crouched behind the curtain, eyes locked on the corrupted below, gnawing at what had once been a person. Not far off, dozens more were coming snarling, closing in fast. I opened my phone. The news was everywhere, 24 cities across the country, locked down simultaneously. The timestamp read 8:01 a.m., July 19, 2022. The corrupted paced below, snarling without end. I was starting to regret pulling an all-nighter. My body was exhausted and my eyes were burning. The power and internet were still on. Of the 50 power banks we'd bought, 10 had finished charging overnight. I swapped in 10 fresh ones and kept the cycle going. My father opened his laptop and started downloading classic films and TV series. My mother smoked 3 cigarettes in silence. Then she picked up the wire and pliers she'd pulled from the study earlier, crouched by the security door and listened. I knew what she was thinking. The corrupted weren't likely to breach the building just yet, and looters hadn't surfaced either. This was the window, the safest moment to wire the fire door on our stairwell shut. The elevators in our complex required a key card. Each card could only access the floors assigned to it. Nothing outside sounded close, but caution cost nothing. After a long wait, my mother made her move. She'd meant to go alone, but I wasn't comfortable with that. I grabbed a kitchen knife and followed, the 2 of us easing open the security door together. The building was completely silent. For all I knew, we were the only ones in it. Following a tutorial we'd just looked up, we twisted the wire into a military dead knot. The military dead knot holds against both brute force and finesse. The only way to open it is from the inside. As for the fire door between our corridor and the empty unit next door, My mother's view was simple: we'd come this far, so leave no gap. So we tied a quick release knot on the opposite stairwell door, then added several padlocks to the one between our unit and the empty apartment next to us. Back inside, I ate a piece of chocolate and started observing the corrupted below. Films are fiction. I couldn't afford to evaluate whatever was walking around down there based on someone else's imagination. The person who had been attacked that morning had already joined the corrupted. From this, I concluded the corruption virus spreads through saliva and blood. For now, the ones below showed no sign of higher intelligence. They were drifting in aimless circles. Earlier, when the vomiting man had been sick, they'd all registered it converging and clustering near Building 10, where he lived. That suggested hearing, and possibly smell, were what the corrupted used to locate prey. Our curtains were heavy-duty, and we'd kept them drawn tight since the glass installation the night before. Other units weren't so careful. Some had thin, semi-transparent curtains, and you could see everything happening inside. When I'd seen enough of the corrupted, I picked up a pen and notebook and started logging which units appeared to be occupied. Directly across from us was Building 10, at least 3 households. Building 10, Unit 1, Floor 7, Apartment 2, an elderly couple. Building 10, Unit 3, Floor 12, Apartment 1, a university student back for the summer. Building 10, Unit 4, Floor 5, Apartment 2, the vomiting man's unit. Exact number of occupants unknown. Behind us sat Building 14. I watched it all morning until my eyes went flat. Not a sign of life. That was all I had on the buildings in front and behind us for now. I'd add more if anything changed. After a string of yawns, my mother suggested we all get some sleep. It sounded reckless, all 3 of us out at once, no one keeping watch during the collapse. But we'd prepared well, and the stairwells were locked. Given where things stood, sleeping soundly for once seemed like a reasonable risk. I was out the moment I lay down and didn't wake until something was pounding at the door. I opened my eyes to pure darkness. But the smell in the air, something in it felt deeply wrong. The stench of rot was so thick it seemed to press against me from every direction, and when I covered my nose and mouth with my hand, whatever was on my hand made me gag on the spot. I fumbled along the pillow with a sticky hand until I found my phone. The dim light from the screen brought the room back into shape around me. Less than a centimeter from my face was a corrupted, heavily decayed, and in the glow of the screen, we stared at each other. In that 1 second, a tremor moved through me from the soles of my feet to the top of my skull. I recognized those eyes. I had seen them 24 hours ago, at the airport in Baicheng. My father was shaking me. Gradually, the nightmare loosened its grip. The rotting eyes were gone. The nightlight was on. My limbs were so numb and heavy, it felt like lead had been poured into them. For a moment, I genuinely wondered if the corrupted in my dream had eaten them. My father laid a cool, damp cloth across my forehead, then pressed a few pills into my mouth and helped me wash them down. The warm water slid down, and I noticed for the first time that my throat was swollen. In my daze, he spooned a few mouthfuls of congee into me. I had no appetite at all. After a few sips, I lay back down and was asleep again. I slept through the entire day. Medicine was given at intervals. At some point, rubbing alcohol was applied over my whole body. When I properly came to, it was the afternoon of the 20th. That was when I learned I'd been running a high fever since I'd fallen asleep the night before. 2 days of no sleep, sustained terror, and then an all-night supply operation the moment I got home. And I, with my rock-bottom physical fitness, was the only one who had collapsed. It turned out I handled the reality of the corrupted far worse than either of my parents. Once I recovered, I would start training. I couldn't afford to be this fragile. Fortunately, our medicine supply was well stocked, and my father had barely slept. He'd spent the night keeping my fever down with alcohol and cool cloths. It hadn't turned into anything worse. The fever had broken, but my throat still ached, and the aftermath of it left me spinning like a top. I got up and washed my face, then had a bowl of congee with some of the garlic eggplant we'd pickled ourselves. The dizziness finally cleared. My father went to catch up on sleep. I went back to the window to observe the corrupted. A full day had passed. The number of corrupted between buildings 10 and 12 hadn't changed, still 11. That most likely meant no new corrupted had entered the complex. Whether it was because of the earlier outbreaks, the residents here seemed reasonably well stocked, and apparently had watched enough survival films to know better than to go out and get themselves killed. I still didn't know what the corrupted ran on. Beyond humans, they seemed to need no sustenance at all. The stray cats in the complex didn't interest them in the least. They showed no aversion to daylight. Any sound drew them instantly. They lunged and tore without hesitation. Their sensitivity to sound was clearly acute. Over the next several days, the corrupted in the complex went without feeding. Their movements grew sluggish, nowhere near as sharp as they'd been at the start. Then Building 14 finally showed a sign of life. Unit 2, Floor 16, Apartment 2 directly facing us. I spotted it while scanning with binoculars. A man was taping a note to his window. I called my mother over immediately. Look. Squinting through the lenses, we finally made out 4 unsteady characters, desperately need supplies. Do we help him or not? It was a question with no easy answer. While I was still wrestling with it, the man appeared to pass out from hunger. He slumped over the windowsill and went still. The 3 of us held a brief family meeting. Perhaps because the collapse was still new, the social order hadn't fully broken down yet. Hope was still alive in us, the belief that rescue would come, that this wouldn't last forever. In the end we agreed yes, we'd help, but not too much. We knew better than to show our hand. In the collapse, 2 packs of emergency biscuits and 2 chocolate bars, and just like that, you've pulled someone back from the edge. How long he could make it last was his problem to solve. We couldn't support him indefinitely. In the collapse, people's hearts can turn without warning. The decision to help lifted something off me, but how to actually get the supplies to him was its own problem. There was roughly 50 meters of open air between our building and building 14, far too wide to throw anything across. And risking our lives to hand deliver it wasn't an option. Just then, someone in our building, I had no idea who, had a drone. It flew past my window carrying 2 packs of instant noodles, heading straight for building 14. We weren't the only ones who had seen the sign. Whoever was flying it was clearly a beginner. The drone wobbled and nearly dropped more than once before it barely managed to hover at the window ledge of the 16th floor apartment across the way. The man who'd passed out was still slumped at the window. Someone else beside him, who had clearly been waiting, reached out and took the supplies. The droning hum of the drone pulled some of the corrupted's attention. They surged eagerly toward building 14 at first, and then followed it back to building 12 when it returned. The corrupted's hearing had sharpened. The drone's owner seemed to live just a few floors below us. These past days had felt so quiet that I'd nearly convinced myself our building was empty except for us. The man who'd passed out from hunger was awake again, hunched over, one hand pressed to his stomach, pulling the curtain shut with the other. Building 14 went still and silent once more. That night I took the watch. My parents went to bed. I was reading when I heard it a creak. I switched off the nightlight, set down the book, and listened for the direction. I followed the sound down until my ear was flat against the floor. And then it stopped. Something was wrong. I stayed there, flat on the floor, unmoving. And for several minutes, the only sound in the world was the ticking of a clock. I knew better than to let my guard down. I was just about to go wake my mother when muffled moaning drifted up from the balcony side, somewhere below and to my right. The sound jolted me. I crawled to the window and lifted the edge of the curtain. Below and to one side, the sound of shattering glass, the secondary bedroom window on the 14th floor, cut through the night. A woman, her face covered in blood, was being choked by 2 large hands. Half her body was already out the window, suspended in midair. Her flailing arms caught the light, and when I looked closely, I realized it was shards of glass embedded in her skin. Then she looked up. She saw me. Her mouth opened, then closed. I don't read lips, but I understood. Then she was shoved hard and fell, hitting the ground with a sound I will not forget. She lay with her head tilted toward our building. Even in death, her eyes stayed fixed in our direction. Below, the long-starved corrupted screamed forward, tearing into the flesh and blood pooling on the ground. The night split open. Some of those sleeping nearby stirred at the crash. In the dark, as if by unspoken agreement, no one turned on a light. I stood frozen where I was. My teeth were chattering. Nothing else in my body felt like it belonged to me. My calves began to cramp. I dug my fingers into the wall and slowly let myself slide to the floor. Then the sound of glass crunching underfoot from somewhere below. I picked up my phone, the screen already smeared with the sweat from my palms switched to the rear camera, and held it through the gap in the curtain. I angled it toward the 14th floor. A figure filled the frame, half his body leaning out from the broken window, scanning the surroundings. His gaze drifted toward our building, and stopped. Through the camera, we faced each other. For a moment I was certain he'd seen me, and then he looked away, his eyes moving on to the other units. A dark feeling settled over me. This man's intentions didn't stop at one apartment, and something about him felt familiar. My parents had woken up at some point and were asking me what was going on. The moment I saw them, it hit me like a blow to the head. The man in building 14, floor 16, apartment 2. The one who had received the 2 packs of instant noodles from our downstairs neighbor. It was him. The thought that the victim might have been the very neighbor who had sent him food, cold sweat ran down the side of my face in an instant. After I told them everything, neither of my parents had any interest in going back to sleep. My mother was certain of it. The victim had to be the kind neighbor with the drone. My father's skin went cold when he heard it. If our neighbor hadn't sent supplies first, it might have been us tonight, he said, shaken. In this world, doing a good deed can get you killed. A heavy silence fell over all 3 of us. The brutal truth had been thrown in our faces with no warning and no mercy. Never test what people are capable of. That was the first lesson the collapse had taught us. We knew we couldn't afford to sit with the fear. We needed to be sharp, because this killer's targets didn't end with one apartment. The moment he'd slipped into building 12, every single person in this building was in serious danger. How had he gotten from building 14 to building 12? With so many corrupted below, avoiding them should have been nearly impossible. We hadn't sent him supplies ourselves precisely because we couldn't figure out how to cross between buildings. Something was nagging at me. I went back for my observation notebook, and it came to me. Since the corrupted had appeared, no one in the complex had gone outside. No one going out most likely meant no new corrupted had been introduced. The underground parking garage required residents to scan their license plates to enter, with special handling for exceptions. So if no one had driven out recently, and no one had let the corrupted into the building, then the corrupted almost certainly hadn't found their way into the underground garage. And if the corruption virus only spread through direct contact, the underground garage was likely the safest route available. The man from building 14 had almost certainly figured this out and taken that risk to get across. But this was all theory. Any variable I hadn't accounted for could knock the whole thing down. Crossing through the garage was still extremely dangerous. If it were me, I never would have chosen that route, not with my life on the line. That told me something. This man had nothing to lose, and nothing to hold him back. In the end, we agreed I would go get some rest. My father would take the watch, and my mother would add another layer of reinforcement to our fire door. We were together, and no one was going to break through what we'd built. The next day, exactly as we'd expected, the man wasn't satisfied with whatever he'd taken from the unit on the 14th floor. He began working his way through the building floor by floor. He was methodical about it, starting at the top floor, the 26th, and working down. I knew no one lived above the 20th floor. Sure enough, by mid-morning he'd cleared everything above it. I'd expected him to reach us around 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Instead, at 2:30 I heard a faint rustling. He was here. I pressed my ear to the security door and heard the muffled scrape of a pick working against the lock, and beneath it, his breathing, ragged with excitement he couldn't quite contain. Damn, his cursing went on for 10 solid minutes. My father tried to cover my ears. I almost laughed, and stepped back from the door on my own. What he didn't know was that before the collapse, I'd been a battle-hardened trash talker in the rift. Under different circumstances, I'd have been the one making him cover his ears. Whatever tools he had, they were no match for the reinforced fire door on our stairwell. I turned to the window. Below, the corrupted had heard the noise and were already. The corrupted were gathering below our building. The man seemed to have worn himself out, cursing. His voice slowly died down. I stared at the corrupted below, and a wild idea began to take shape. It screamed inside my chest, surging up through the trembling until it burst free. Who says being trapped indoors means you have to be the lamb waiting for slaughter? My father had gone from white-knuckled fear to a kind of calm indifference, and before the man outside had even given up, he was already calling me into the kitchen to start dinner. My mother stayed at her post in the living room. We all knew you need a full stomach before you can deal with trouble. I was mostly there to assist. Tonight we were breaking out the good stuff, braised pork ribs. First, rinse the ribs and draw out the blood. While my father wasn't looking, I poured the bloody water into an empty water bottle. Then in went the ribs into cold water. Once it came to a boil, I skimmed off the foam with a spoon, and lifted the ribs out one by one with chopsticks onto a plate. They looked plain enough at this stage, just cooked meat, nothing special yet. I hadn't had meat in days. Even without any seasoning, I was already swallowing. My father heated oil in the wok, tossed in the scallion, ginger, and garlic until the kitchen filled with fragrance. Then added the ribs, pouring in the cooking wine, light soy sauce, and dark soy sauce, tossing everything together. While I slipped into the bathroom with the filled bottle. Once the ribs had taken on a deep, glossy color, I poured in the boiling water I'd prepared earlier, put the lid on, and let it braise over high heat. The man outside had finally run out of steam. Before he left, he threw out a threat, cursing that he'd make us pay. I went back to the living room and tried to track him through the window. A moment later, he appeared in the secondary bedroom of Building 14, Floor 4, Apartment 2. When he saw me, he hurled an empty bottle toward our building, just to provoke us. It didn't come close, didn't even reach the 15th floor, but the sudden movement made my expression shift. Satisfied, he flashed a filthy grin and followed it with an obscene gesture. The image of the woman from the night before flashed through my mind, her mouth moving in her final moments, telling me to run. I kept my face blank, as though he'd actually frightened me. Behind my back, my fist was tightening by the second. That only excited him more. He pointed 2 fingers at his own eyes, then turned them toward me. I held his gaze one moment longer, then turned and drew the curtains completely shut. Below, the corrupted were scrambling over the bottle that had fallen, gnawing at it desperately. They were starving. The ribs came off the heat, and the smell hit me so hard my legs nearly gave out. While everyone else was choking down dry instant noodles, we were sitting down to ribs with color, fragrance, and flavor. And honestly, I started to think I might have been put on this earth specifically for this meal. The rice came out gleaming white. My parents picked up their chopsticks, and I didn't waste a second. I grabbed a rib and got it into my mouth. Without any effort, the meat slid clean off the bone, rich but not greasy, lean but not tough, perfectly balanced. I scooped in a mouthful of rice, each grain plump and distinct, mixing with the springy, tender meat. If I had a morale bar, this meal would have refilled every single point. In the end, we each had a bowl and a half of rice, soaking the last of it in the rich, braising sauce before finally pushing back, satisfied. After dinner, my mother took over the dishes. I sat with my phone, sorting through the music I'd downloaded in advance. The trash inside had piled up and was starting to smell, attracting flies. I suggested tossing some of it out the window. My father agreed. Letting it keep building up wasn't an option. This would have to do for now. Throwing things off a high floor wasn't a concern anymore, no one down there to hit. I opened the living room window with the bag of trash, and the man from floor 14, apartment 2, caught me in the act. He'd been staring at our unit, turning something over in his mind. And when he saw me appear, he gave me a sleazy grin, all yellowed teeth. I smiled back. Then I picked up the bag of bathroom trash in my hand and threw it toward his window, just like he'd thrown that empty bottle at us. Watching him explode in fury with garbage all over his face, I gave him a polite wave and said, "Hi." Then I shut the window and pulled the curtains before he could respond. I'd done what I needed to do. Now it was time to pull the trap shut. I retrieved the 2 bottles of rib blood I'd prepared from the bathroom, eased open our security door, and slipped out. The moment I opened the door, I heard him slam out of his unit below. I calculated the timing. The instant he pushed through the stairwell door on the 14th floor, I jabbed the elevator button. The elevator was coming up from the ground floor, still on its way. He reached our stairwell landing before it arrived. That was exactly what I wanted. Now he was busy hammering at our door on the 16th floor, which solved my biggest problem. As the elevator floor numbers ticked upward, my adrenaline spiked with them, my palms burning hot. Through his curses and kicks against the door, the elevator finally arrived. I moved with careful, silent steps, bottles in hand, and slipped inside. My heart was slamming so hard my chest had started to ache. Once inside, I swiped my card and selected the ground floor. The elevator descended without a sound. The unit entrance on the ground floor was exactly as I'd expected, no sign of any breach. I'd been logging the corrupted below for days, their numbers, their behavior, and I'd checked again before coming down. The count had only grown, never dropped. That confirmed my theory. The corrupted hadn't made it inside the building yet, and no one had gone outside in days. Everyone had seen enough survival films to know better. No one wanted to be the first to go out and get themselves killed. The corrupted were gnawing at them from the inside with hunger. Anyone reckless enough to step outside would be swallowed by the horde instantly, picked clean before they could even turn, with no chance of coming back alive. I eased open the ground floor stairwell fire door first, and poured the entire contents of 1 bottle into the stairwell. Then I took the 2nd bottle and my phone, pressed myself against the wall, and moved toward the unit entrance. The man's cursing and the pounding on our door drifted down faintly from above. The corrupted outside hadn't fully converged on the entrance yet, but they weren't far. I set the uncapped bottle on the floor, then carefully turned the door lock. Click. The sound of the door unlocking cut through the silence of the complex like a blade. Several corrupted turned their heads and began drifting slowly toward me. I drew a deep breath and pushed the door open just a crack. The creak of the door sent them into a frenzy of snarling. Fine sweat broke out on the tip of my nose. I tipped the open bottle into the gap, letting the blood spill through, then pulled out my phone, wedged the bottle in the crack before the corrupted could close in, and hit play on the New Year overture I'd downloaded in advance. Then I ran and didn't look back. To the bright, festive strains of the overture, the corrupted were drawn in by the blood and the sound, clawing through the gap one after another. My hands were trembling but somehow steady. One swipe of the card and the elevator was locked to the 16th floor. As the doors closed, a wave of corrupted came screaming toward me. Their stench forced its way through the sealed elevator doors, flooded my nose, and crawled down into my throat. I grabbed the handrail and gagged, the nausea so intense my eyes went bloodshot. I ground through it until the doors opened on the 16th floor, then stumbled out and crouched by the entrance, one hand pressed to my stomach. The man was still cursing. He'd hammered a visible dent into the fire door. I took one last look at the fire door, then slipped back inside. A short while later, a scream tore through the entire building. My parents figured out what I'd done almost immediately. It was the first time in over 20 years that my mother's eyes had gone red in front of me. She couldn't understand where I'd found the nerve to go down to the ground floor alone, facing both the corrupted and a killer. What she couldn't make sense of even more was why it had been me and not her. She didn't scold me for putting myself in danger. She didn't condemn me for what had happened to the man. She just listened to my account, went quietly back to her room, and closed the door. But her silence hurt more than any scolding could have. My father had the watch that night. I couldn't sleep, so I came out in the middle of the night to sit with him. The stars above the complex were brilliant, with human activity reduced to almost nothing. The sky had gone clear. My father knew I had something to say. He just looked at me, and somehow, under that gaze, the words dried up. "Son, was what you did today really as foolproof as you thought?" I opened my mouth, and the lie tumbled out before I could stop it. "Of course. I'm not an idiot. Why would I gamble with my life?" He kept staring, and I felt the hollowness in my own chest before he said a word. The truth was, I knew the plan had holes in it. If the corrupted had reached me before I got into the elevator, if the man had gone back to the 14th floor and noticed the elevator numbers changing, I'd have been finished, completely and irreversibly. The plan was high reward, high risk, and that's exactly why I'd never intended to involve them. My father looked out at the corrupted below and spoke quietly. "Is that how you see us, as people who need to hide behind you?" I said nothing. He continued, "Watching your child go into danger for your sake is the cruelest thing a parent can endure. Did you consider there were 2 people asking for food? Where was the other one? Could he have been waiting on the 14th floor to ambush you?" This time, I genuinely had no answer. I hadn't thought about it at all. Somehow, from the moment he'd killed the family on that floor, I'd assumed he was alone. "Son, setting aside the fact that we're your parents, you need to learn to work with other people." My father's expression was more serious than I'd ever seen it. "We are not a burden." My mother had slipped out of the room without either of us noticing. She said softly, "We survived together." A month had gone by in what felt like a blink. By the end of July, Yuan had lost both water and power. At first it was manageable, but as time went on, more and more people were forced out of their buildings to search for supplies. Of the 13 people I had logged in our complex, only 5 made it back. While others were consumed with anxiety over food and water, I was honestly living well. Meat twice a week, and my father made every meal something special. By late August, the peak of summer in Xingyuan, we only had 2 solar generators. To save power, we kept the air conditioning and fans off, cooling ourselves the old-fashioned way with handheld fans. During the day, I wilted in whatever corner the sun couldn't reach, and the night watch with the windows open was almost bearable by comparison. We ground through another 2 weeks. Just when I thought I was finally acclimating to the heat, a heavy rain hit one September night. It came without warning, wild and relentless, like the sky had upended a vast basin of water loud enough to make sleep impossible. After 2 days, the downpour eased, settling into a week of steady drizzle. By the time I'd started making brown sugar and ginger water to ease the ache in my knees, the rain finally stopped. Northern drainage systems weren't built for this kind of volume, and nothing here had prepared for rainfall on this scale. The consecutive days of rain had submerged the ground floor entirely, and the second floor was barely keeping its head above water. I started worrying that the buildings might collapse if they stayed waterlogged too long. My father told me not to worry. Prolonged flooding would most likely just shorten the building's lifespan, not bring it down. That settled me. The corrupted below had vanished submerged, their fate unknown. The day after the rain stopped, someone couldn't wait any longer. They threw a pile of trash into the water. The corrupted didn't react. Emboldened, they built a makeshift raft and pushed out to scavenge. They came back late, hauling a full crate of supplies, buzzing with excitement. And it took them and a companion over 10 minutes to carry everything in. 2 more days passed with no movement from the submerged corrupted. More people started going out. By then the water had receded enough to expose the tops of their heads. The 5 who had made it back safely built their own small rafts and headed out together. We kept to our own world, our own quiet sanctuary. Until the corrupted were gone and our supplies ran out, we wouldn't leave the fortress. Besides, the corrupted I'd let in were still inside the building. The ones outside were underwater, but the ones in the stairwells still scratched at doors from time to time. When the group returned, it was already dark. The water below had dropped further. The corrupted's heads were now fully exposed, and with the water level lower, the rafts were struggling to bear the weight of both people and supplies. They didn't dare wade through the water, so they settled for bringing back less. In the dim light, shadows moved like ghosts. I kept feeling like the corrupted below were watching them. Just a feeling their eyes had rotted through entirely, so watching wasn't really the right word. But the submerged corrupted felt different somehow. Changed. The group finished moving their haul quickly and headed upstairs together, arms around each other's shoulders. What they'd brought back would barely last one person 3 days. I figured they'd be going out again tomorrow. Sure enough, early the next morning, a crowd had gathered in the complex garden, ready to move. This time there were 11 of them, each towing a small bamboo raft, men and women both. The elderly couple from Building 10 had joined the group. My father had made flour drop soup that morning. I took a bowl, slipped onto the balcony, and kept watch on them through the curtain, eating in small sips. Around 9:30, 2 more arrived, a man and a woman, both in matching athletic gear. They had to be the team leaders. The water had dropped to chest level on the corrupted. The group finished counting heads and prepared to set out. It happened in an instant. The corrupted, who had shown no movement in the water, erupted. They hit the group at a speed I had never seen before. The leader reacted fast. A single stroke took the head off the nearest one, but the others weren't so fortunate. The elderly couple were the first to fall. Then the male leader was tackled by a corrupted, moving even faster. And then 5, 7, 10, 13. The garden became a slaughterhouse. The blood from the wounds mixed with the filthy floodwater until there was no telling them apart. The complex went quiet, as though nothing had happened at all. Only the thick, metallic stench in the air remained so heavy I felt like I was drowning in it. The scattered remnants of those people lay strewn across the floodwater, the empty garden and its waterlogged weeds like empty graves bearing witness to the slaughter. Wind swept through the empty complex. Then I noticed every single corrupted was facing the same direction. I followed their gaze. There stood a corrupted far larger and more powerful than the rest, and its eyes held none of the blank vacancy of the others. The others gathered around it as it moved into the garden. It seemed to be surveying the carnage like a general inspecting a victory. It hit me all at once. This was an intelligent being. The corrupted below had evolved and an alpha had emerged. I told my parents what I'd observed. Given that the corrupted were evolving, I classified what I'd seen into 3 stages. Stage 1 corrupted were what we'd encountered at the beginning of the collapse, defined primarily by the absence of intelligence. Stage 2 corrupted were the evolved type that had carried out today's massacre, fully upgraded physical capabilities, with rudimentary intelligence. Stage 3 corrupted were the dominant intelligent type capable of leading the others and showing what appeared to be genuine emotion. Evolution was clearly the trajectory. If they weren't stopped, Stage 4 and Stage 5 would almost certainly follow. That was not good news. We'd been cut off for a long time now. What the world had become I had no idea. When would anyone come for us? For the first time I began to doubt that humanity would win. The corrupted below kept up their act for another week before concluding there was nothing left to feed on in the complex. Then they moved together, toward the city center. We waited until the last corrupted had gone. When it finally did, we exhaled, but a vast loneliness wrapped itself around me. The world was too quiet, as if only the three of us remained in it. My father noticed the darkness settling over me. He handed me the task of growing vegetables. I scattered the seeds and felt, in some way, like I was tending to something more, a small piece of humanity's hope. Some of the potatoes we'd stored had started to sprout. I planted those alongside the new vegetables. First, I cut out the sprouted sections with a knife, then buried them in water bottles packed with soil, and once leaves appeared, I dug up the root sections with their soil intact, and transferred them into larger cardboard delivery boxes alongside the other seedlings that had taken hold. I fertilized the whole batch every 20 days, and any flower buds that appeared trimmed away with scissors to keep the plants from putting their energy into blooming instead of growing. Summer turned to autumn. Autumn gave way to winter. By the fourth round of fertilizing, it was early January 2023. The other vegetables had long since been harvested. The containers were now dominated entirely by small potatoes. I pulled the whole batch from the soil, leaving a small portion in the kitchen to freeze, keeping another small portion in the refrigerator's fresh compartment, and carrying the rest back into the bedroom. The moment I was inside, I threw myself onto the bed, dropped the potatoes, and burrowed back under the covers to chase the chill out of my shaking body. The charcoal fire was burning strong. My parents were in bed watching a downloaded drama series, just as the plot was hitting its peak. Since winter had arrived in Qingyuan and temperatures had plummeted, we'd consolidated into one room to conserve the charcoal. When we were awake, we opened a window once an hour to ventilate. When we slept, the fire went out and on went the electric heating blankets. Beyond the master bedroom and the vegetable balcony where the charcoal burned, the rest of the apartment was cold as an icehouse. We had no way of knowing the actual temperature, but every instinct told us this winter was colder than any we could remember. The moment you stepped out of the room with the charcoal fire and moved anywhere else in the apartment, within just a few steps, my nose and ears felt like they were about to snap off. The cold, a sharp, biting pain. Today was the minor cold, colder than yesterday. The local tradition called for festival 8-grain porridge, but porridge alone felt too plain. Winter called for lamb to drive the cold from the body. We couldn't get fancy, so we went with the simplest option, lamb hot pot. My father had soaked the last of our glutinous rice, pearl barley, mung beans, and red dates the night before, leaving them on the bedroom table. He'd also sliced 2 pounds of lamb ahead of time for the hot pot. My parents saw me come in and started preparing the meal. We cooked in the master bedroom. Now in the kitchen, the water we needed would develop a thin layer of ice within a minute. My father combined the soaked porridge ingredients with rice and bottled water in the rice cooker, and started the festival 8-grain porridge. I'd never been fond of the porridge. Even last year on this day I hadn't touched it, but this year was different. Every ingredient in that pot meant something now. In the half year since the corrupted had risen, food had become precious in a way I'd never understood before. The porridge was straightforward. After that, all three of us turned to the lamb hot pot. I crouched by the bin and peeled potatoes. My mother bundled herself up completely and went to the refrigerator's fresh compartment for the vegetables we'd grown ourselves: scallions, ginger, garlic, cilantro, shiitake mushrooms, napa cabbage, sweet potato, and radish. After bringing those to the bedroom, she went back for the supplies we'd stockpiled before the collapse: baby corn, hot pot balls, fish fillets, dipping sauces, frozen tofu, pickled cabbage, and the lamb slices my father had cut the day before. I washed all the vegetables in a basin of water, then brought out the electric pot. In went the bottled water, scallion pieces, ginger slices, and red dates. My father finished cutting the remaining vegetables. We arranged everything on the table, and the three of us dove back under our covers in unison, watching the water slowly begin to bubble and roll, steam rising in warm columns above the pot. It was like a facial steam, warm and gentle against my face, comfortable enough to make my eyelids heavy. The drama on my phone was still playing, but it had faded into background noise, just a soft soundtrack to the hot pot. The moment the water boiled, my father lowered in a full plate of lamb. I followed with the hot pot balls and frozen tofu, and within moments the whole room was thick with fragrance. I picked up a piece of lamb, dipped it, and put it in my mouth. For a long moment I couldn't say anything at all. The first round of meat disappeared fast. I lowered in the second plate, along with the sliced potato and sweet potato. The frozen tofu from the first round was ready. I dipped it and ate it in small bites so hot it scorched my teeth. My mother added a piece of the softened napa cabbage to my bowl. I tore it into strips with my chopsticks, dipped it, and it dissolved the moment it touched my tongue. We ate until we were drenched in sweat. I peeled off my sweater without thinking, feeling so warm that stepping outside would have sent steam rising from the top of my head. At the end, I ladled a bowl of the broth. By now it had absorbed the richness of the lamb, the clean freshness of the vegetables, and the sharp distinctive tang of the pickled cabbage. I drank it in long gulps, and felt something in me rise like life itself had been elevated. When we finished, my father poured the remaining hot broth into a large bowl and set it outside to freeze. I rode the warmth and exercised with my mother. 30 push-ups, 15 minutes of plank hold, 60 mountain climbers. A single push-up used to be a struggle. None of this was hard anymore. That evening we had the festival 8-grain porridge and nothing else, no need to burden our stomachs further. When we finished, my father looked at the calendar. 17 days until the new year, he said. Snow fell on Qingyuan in the middle of the night, heavy and fast, blanketing everything white. The world looked scrubbed clean. At 3 in the morning, a massive explosion from the direction of the city center jolted us awake. The sky above that part of the city glowed faintly red, the deep black of the night stained, as though someone had splashed it with color. I had a feeling. The corrupted had evolved again. After that first blast, the explosions didn't stop for the rest of the night. We gave up on sleep and got out of bed. The scale of it was unlike anything before. It didn't quiet down until well past 9 in the morning. Over breakfast, I said it hesitantly. Explosions that big, could it be the military? My parents went quiet. The moment the thought took hold, something like a seed broke through the surface in my chest, taking root, growing, brushing against me every now and then with a warmth I couldn't ignore. But hope was too precious a thing in the collapse to hold on to freely. The more I wanted it to be true, the more afraid I became, afraid it was all just something I'd invented. The answer came quickly. 1 week later, at dawn, 3 heavy military vehicles rolled into our complex. But since the last evolution of the corrupted, there had been no signs of life in the complex. And we'd let our guards slip. The night watch had been abandoned. The complex gate slammed shut with a piercing screech of metal that woke me. I wrapped myself in my down jacket and looked through the curtains. Strangers had entered the complex. The gate closed. 4 men got out, then quickly got back into the vehicles and drove toward Building 10, the closest building to the north gate. I rubbed my hands together and stamped my feet against the cold. Counting, roughly 12 people had gotten out. 4 of them were carrying a stretcher into the building. Someone was injured. The new year passed without flavor. 2 weeks earlier, this group had taken up residence in our complex. Their supplies were absurdly well stocked, and the moment I saw that, I knew they weren't here with good intentions. Most likely because Jinyu Yuan was the only newly developed complex in Qingyuan from the previous year. After 6 months of the collapse, they assumed the place was empty. Without checking carefully, they organized a full sweep, systematically stripping the complex of anything of value. Building 10 was the first to suffer. The man I'd seen vomiting on the tarmac, his body was thrown from the 5th floor. He'd long since frozen solid, no telling how long he'd been dead, and when he hit the ground, he shattered into several large pieces. I looked away. Below, a round of whistling broke out. This apparently had become their entertainment in the collapse. They spent an entire day working through Building 10's 5 units and managed to turn up some food and medicine. I realized those were the leftovers from the group that had gone out during the floods. With every sweep these scavengers made, the last traces of our complex's residents were erased. All those days and nights of desperate scavenging, all those moments of heart-stopping fear, everything those people had fought for collapsed in the scavengers' search. My fingertips went numb. I didn't even have time to mourn them. At the rate they were moving, we would be next by tomorrow. The moment they found the locked stairwell door, it would mean the end of us. We spent the entire day on emergency ration bars alone, the charcoal unlit, terrified of giving ourselves away with even the smallest sign. Building 10 across from us blazed with light, faint music drifting over. The scavengers seemed to have mastered the art of dealing with the corrupted. There was none of the careful, edge-of-a-knife tension that had defined every day of the collapse for us. Compared to their ease, the air in our apartment was suffocating. I went through everything we could possibly use. One by one, I ran the scenarios in my head. One by one, they fell apart. I refused to die like this. I had fled Baicheng, come all the way back to Qingyuan, built this fortress. I had committed to surviving. If the conditions didn't exist, I would make them. I closed my eyes. A plan began to take shape. Our doors and windows were solid, built from the highest-grade blast-proof materials. Even under a sustained violent assault, they could hold for 2 hours. But our overall combat strength was almost nothing. Kitchen knives and pliers were no match for their arsenal. I had the hardest shield in the world, but no spear to go with it. Find the problem, solve the problem. When your own strength falls short, borrow someone else's. Specifically, the corrupted responsible for those explosions in the city center. My mother and father worked in the dark, twisting bed sheets into a makeshift rope. I tied one end around myself and handed the other to my parents. To move freely, I wore only a sweater. Off came the down jacket, and even inside, the cold hit me with several sharp, involuntary shivers. The window hadn't been opened in so long it had frozen shut. I forced it open centimeter by centimeter. The wind outside was bone-cutting. The sound of the window opening let out a low, muffled groan into the night air, before being swallowed by the howling northeast wind. Fortunately, it wasn't loud. I crouched on the window ledge for a full minute before my body could stiffen on me, then took the first step, swinging out through the window, standing on the outer ledge fully exposed to the outside. I was so cold I couldn't even shiver. No time to adjust, I crouched right there on the ledge, gripped the rope, let my body swing free, and lowered myself slowly downward. The bedsheet rope let out a tooth-aching creak with every shift of my weight, but I wasn't afraid. If anything, my blood was running hot, alive with the thrill of it. 3 minutes later, the shattered secondary bedroom window on the 14th floor was right in front of me. I planted one foot on the window ledge, shielded my face with my arm, and pushed through. Inside was a wrecked bedroom. The blood stains from the struggle had long since dried, barely visible against the dark brown floor. I almost didn't recognize it as the home of the woman who had been pushed from above. I moved to the bedroom door and opened it, searching for what I'd come for. Everything went more smoothly than I'd imagined. The wingshade drone, the one that had been used to send supplies, was sitting right there on the dining table. But it had frozen solid in the cold, its shell dull and gray. I had no idea if it still worked. I found the rest of the accessories nearby. Once I had everything, I went back to the secondary bedroom. I gave the rope 2 sharp tugs. It shook back quickly in response. I tied the drone and charger to the rope and sent them up first. Watching the rope rise slowly until it disappeared above, I finally let out a breath. The cold in my back caught up with me all at once, completely numb. 2 more minutes passed. The rope descended again. Tied it around myself with practiced hands, stepped back out onto the ledge, and began shifting toward the edge. Coming down was easy. Going up was another matter entirely. It took a full 20 minutes before I hauled myself back through the window on the 16th floor, shaken but unharmed. My father shut the window the instant I was inside and pressed a bowl of ginger soup into my hands. I felt it move all the way down from my throat to my stomach, every inch of it. Then came a sudden wave of heat in my stomach, followed immediately by a cramp. My father had already warmed the bedroom. I burrowed under the covers and curled up, riding out the discomfort. I looked at the wing shade, drone by the bed, its charging light glowing red. Relief settled over me. It wasn't broken. I drifted in and out of sleep for 3 hours before my body finally came back to me. Still dark outside, just 5 in the morning. I had no appetite at all, but forced down a few bites of emergency ration bar. My father was applying heat patches to the drone, hoping to buy it a little more endurance in the cold. By 5:30, everything was ready. My mother secured the phone to the drone, and the secondary bedroom window was opened once more. The wind had eased since the middle of the night, but the sky was still completely dark. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Our wingshade drone lurched into the air. A standard drone flies for 30 to 50 minutes. Ours was a wingshade model. Factoring in the cold and the lack of maintenance, a conservative estimate put us at 23 minutes of flight time, which meant we could fly for 11 minutes out, then it had to come back. This model's top speed in calm conditions was 80 kilometers per hour. We conservatively estimated 40 kilometers per hour, meaning 11 minutes would cover 7 kilometers. 7 kilometers out, and it had to turn back. But for a small city like Qingyuan, 7 kilometers was enough. We were only 5 kilometers from the city center in a straight line. The drone's camera fed back live. Burnt-out vehicles lined the streets, shop fronts shattered and dark. The drone threading through one ruined building after another, everything around it swallowed in blackness. But this model had night vision, so most of the surrounding environment was visible through the feed. The 3 of us stared at the screen, rigid with tension, waiting for any sign of hope. 10 minutes in, the alarm I'd set rang out across Qingyuan, a city that had been silent for so long. The New Year overture echoing against empty streets, the contrast sharp and deeply unsettling. Through the live feed, the horde of corrupted I'd been counting on never appeared. Cold sweat broke out along the back of my neck. My heart began pounding like a war drum. The drone's battery had already dropped to half. My mother told me to turn it around. There was no question my plan had failed. I'd imagined the drone's noise drawing the evolved corrupted from the city center into our complex, where they'd clash with the scavengers in a fierce battle, buying us time to find another way out. But I'd drawn nothing. My entire theory was wrong. The drone needed 4 hours to recharge. The next flight couldn't happen until 10 in the morning. By then, the scavengers would already be searching the building. It would be too late. At 5:53 in the morning, the drone landed precisely on our balcony. The sky was still pitch black. My father removed the phone and switched off the alarm that had 7 minutes left on its countdown. My mother carried the drone inside to charge. Outside was thick as ink. Inside that heavy darkness, I was struggling to breathe through the anxiety. A little after 7, the scavengers across the way showed signs of waking. None of us could sleep anymore. My mother went silently to reinforce the fire exit. My father studied how to make the most of his sharpened blades. Fortunately, they still needed to eat. At 8 in the morning, smoke curled from the building across the way. I could only pray they'd linger over breakfast a little longer, but fate tipped the scales in their favor again. Half an hour later, 2 people in heavy down jackets headed toward Building 8 behind them. Just as I let myself breathe, 2 more came out laughing, tools in hand, their direction unmistakable. Building 12. Our building. What had to come had come. I felt the trembling start in my chest, my eardrums vibrating with the rapid pounding of my own heartbeat, the sound growing louder and louder until it nearly drowned everything else out, resonating in my skull. I pushed myself up from my crouch, legs numb, and tried to make it back to the bedroom. The air inside had thinned somehow without my noticing. I forced my eyes open, but everything in front of me was growing thick and blurred, turning a deep green, the world dissolving. And then, a soft drip. I looked down. My nose was bleeding. I tilted my head back, one arm raised. My father rinsed my nose with water until the bleeding finally stopped. The security door downstairs echoed with impact. I lay on the bed and stared at the pale ceiling, mind blank. My father saw the state I was in and pressed a rock-hard frozen piece of chocolate into my hand. They say sugar triggers dopamine, makes you feel something again. I held it in my mouth mechanically, without tasting a thing. But slowly, somehow, my emotions began to lift. I decided to try one more time. This was one last throw of the dice, the final struggle before everything ended for us. An hour and a half later, at 10 in the morning, the wingshade drone lifted from our window ledge on schedule. On its body, 3 letters stood out clearly, SOS. I had written them in what remained of my nosebleed. The scavengers were still deep in their search. They'd reached the 8th floor. The 16th floor was only a matter of time. This time the drone flew with confidence, cutting quickly through the complex and disappearing from sight. My hands trembled without my willing them to. I prayed that the blood and the sound would draw a mass of corrupted and deliver some kind of miracle. The live feed was far clearer now than it had been in the dark. About a minute into the flight, my phone began to play. This time I hadn't set an alarm. I'd built a playlist that would run continuously without stopping. To avoid alerting anyone nearby at the start, I'd recorded a full minute of silence and placed it at the beginning of the playlist just for that first minute of flight. Beyond the change in sound, we'd also changed course. This time the drone flew entirely eastward, angling toward another commercial district on the far side of the city. The streets in daylight looked even more desolate than they had in the dark. From the Unity March to the New Year Overture to the National Anthem, the drone sang its way across the city. But the feed showed nothing, no corrupted anywhere. My heart was sinking. I didn't understand. Where had the corrupted gone? Those explosions, hadn't that been a war between them and the humans? The 11 minutes ran out. It was time to come back. My mother handed control of the drone to me and went to work on the interior defenses. I steered it home, feeling ice cold inside, completely hollow. The return journey was as silent as the outward one. I refused to give up. I dropped the drone lower, hoping that closer to the ground the sound would carry further. But there was nothing, no humans, no corrupted, all gone. The three of us seemed to be the last humans left in Qingyuan. In the time we'd been cut off from the world, Qingyuan had changed in ways I couldn't begin to imagine. The loneliness wrapped around me again, pressing me toward an acceptance I didn't want. We had truly been left behind. My vision blurred. I forced my eyes open and kept them on the screen. The drone was still moving fast. When it was almost back to the complex, I guided it down into a hidden patch of withered grass. Let it stay there. I closed my eyes and said it to myself. Death is where every human story ends. But hope is a fire in the heart, and it does not go out. If we were going to be taken, I wanted to leave the scavengers with as little as possible. The wing-shade drone was too capable a tool. It could not fall into their hands. My father's sharpening grew louder, no longer muffled, no longer hidden. My mother lit a cigarette for the first time in a long while. We were all making our final preparations. I opened my eyes to the harsh scrape of the wet stone and the sharp bite of smoke, picked up my phone, and reached to turn it off. The drone's feed was still frozen on the withered grass of the complex. Then, the moment I picked up the phone, the image moved. 2 hands. No rot, no decay, flushed red from the cold and full of life. My eyes went wide as the hand's owner picked up the drone. Then a head appeared in frame wearing a military cap. His mouth was moving, as if saying something. The image shifted. A disciplined military unit filled the frame, the vehicles beside them bearing a national flag. I knew. We were saved.